My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 32 years old, and I'm sitting in this courthouse hallway clutching a bank statement that's about to change everything. My hands are shaking because in about 10 minutes, I'll be walking into that courtroom where my own sister, my parents, and their lawyer are waiting to destroy my life. They're claiming I stole $25,000 from Beatrice, my older sister. The worst part, my own family believes her over me. But this piece of paper in my hands, this single bank statement is going to turn their world upside down. Before I tell you about the worst day of my life, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? Because what happened next will make you question everything about family loyalty. Let me take you back 6 months before this nightmare began. I was living my quiet, predictable life in Columbus, working as a CPA for a mid-sized accounting firm. My family lived 2 hours away in Springfield, Ohio. There was my dad, Harold, 65, who just retired after 30 years at the Ford plant. My mom, Agnes, 62, worked as a nurse at Springfield General Hospital. Then there was my sister Beatrice, 35, married to Ernest, 37, with 2 kids, Alice, who's 8, and little Tommy, who's 5. Our family wasn't perfect, but I thought we were solid. Dad worked hard his whole life, never missing a day unless he was truly sick. Mom took care of everyone, always worrying about whether we'd eaten enough or were staying warm. I was the responsible one, the one who got good grades, went to college, and built a stable career. Beatrice was different. She'd always been the one who needed help, who found herself in difficult situations that somehow required family assistance. After high school, Beatrice married Ernest pretty quickly. He seemed nice enough at family gatherings, but he never really held down steady work. They moved around a lot, always chasing the next opportunity that never quite panned out. Meanwhile, I focused on my studies, got my CPA certification, and slowly built my career. I lived in a nice one-bedroom apartment, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and had money in my savings account. What I didn't realize then was how much resentment had been building in my family. When Beatrice needed money for rent, they helped. When Ernest's latest business venture failed, they covered their groceries. When the kids needed school supplies, somehow I was expected to contribute too. But it was never presented as helping Beatrice and Ernest. It was always about the children, about family, about doing what's right. I went along with it because that's what you do for family, right? I sent money for Alice's dance classes and Tommy's Little League uniform. I bought Christmas presents and birthday gifts. I showed up for every family gathering with a smile and a casserole. But deep down, I was starting to feel like the family ATM. Every conversation seemed to eventually circle back to some financial need that somehow became my responsibility to help solve. Then came that phone call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was reviewing tax returns when my phone rang. Dad's voice sounded strange, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Maggie, you need to come home right away. We have a family emergency." "What kind of emergency? Is someone hurt?" "Just come home, sweetheart. We'll explain when you get here." The drive from Columbus to Springfield felt like the longest 2 hours of my life. I called back 3 times, but no one answered. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Had someone been in an accident? Was Mom sick? Did something happen to the kids? When I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I noticed Ernest's truck was there, along with a car I didn't recognize. The front porch light was on, even though it was barely 8 o'clock. Through the living room window, I could see figures moving around, but the curtains were drawn tighter than usual. I walked up to the front door and knocked, which felt strange since I'd never had to knock on my own family's door before. Ernest answered, and his expression was cold, almost hostile. "They're waiting for you in the living room," he said without any greeting. Inside, I found the most uncomfortable scene I'd ever witnessed in our house. Mom was sitting on the couch, tissues in her hand, eyes red from crying. Dad was pacing by the fireplace, something he only did when he was really agitated. Beatrice sat in the armchair holding what looked like a stack of papers, her face flushed and angry. The kids were nowhere to be seen, which told me this was serious adult business. "Sit down, Maggie," Dad said, his voice heavy with disappointment. I sat on the edge of the coffee table facing them all. The tension in the room was suffocating. "We need to talk about something very serious," Dad continued. "Beatrice has discovered that someone has been taking money from her bank account. A lot of money. Over several months." I looked at Beatrice expecting her to explain, but she just stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It was like she was looking at a stranger. "How much money?" I asked. $25,000. Dad said each word hitting like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face. $25,000 was more than half my annual salary. "That's terrible. Have you called the bank? The police? That's a serious crime." "We have called the bank." Beatrice finally spoke, her voice shaking with emotion. "And we know who did it." She held up the stack of papers. "These are my bank statements. They show exactly when the money was taken, how it was accessed, and where the logins came from." She paused, looking directly at me. "They came from Columbus, Maggie. From your city. During times when you would have been home from work." The room started spinning. I couldn't process what she was saying. "You think I took your money?" "I don't think it," Beatrice said, standing up. "I know it. The evidence is right here." The next few minutes felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Beatrice spread the bank statements across the coffee table like she was laying out evidence at a crime scene. Each page showed withdrawals, transfers, and online access logs that painted a picture I couldn't believe. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a highlighted line. "March 3rd, 11:47 p.m. Someone logged into my account from an IP address in Columbus. They transferred $800 to a checking account. March 15th, she continued, flipping pages. $2,000. March 28th, 1,500. It goes on and on, Maggie. For 8 months. I leaned forward, studying the papers. The numbers were real, the dates were accurate, but none of it made sense. "Beatrice, I swear to you, I have never accessed your bank account. I don't even know your passwords or account numbers." "You asked me about them last Christmas," Ernest interjected from the doorway. "You said you were helping her organize her finances. Remember, you wanted to know about her banking setup." I remembered that conversation, but it was completely innocent. Beatrice had mentioned struggling to keep track of her accounts, and I'd offered some general advice about budgeting apps and online banking features. I never asked for specific account information. "That's not what happened," I protested. "I was giving you general advice about financial management. I never asked for your account details." "You were the only one who knew I had that savings account," Beatrice shot back. "The one Dad helped me set up for the kids' college fund. Nobody else in the family even knew it existed." This was true, and it hit me like a punch to the stomach. Harold had mentioned setting up a special savings account for Alice and Tommy's education, and I'd encouraged it. But I'd never seen the account details or had any access to it. Mom finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maggie, honey, we need you to explain this. The evidence seems pretty clear." "The evidence is wrong." I stood up, my voice rising. "I would never steal from my own sister. I would never take money meant for my niece and nephew's education. How can you even think I'm capable of that?" "Because the computer doesn't lie," Ernest said, holding up another paper. "These access logs show exactly when someone logged in from what IP address and what they did. It's all here in black and white." Dad stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that broke my heart. It was disappointment mixed with confusion, like he was trying to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the evidence in front of him. "Maggie, we want to believe you, but we need an explanation. How else could this have happened?" I felt trapped. Every piece of evidence seemed to point to me, but I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't done anything wrong. "I don't know how it happened, but I didn't do it. Maybe someone hacked her account. Maybe there's a mistake with the IP tracking. I can show you my bank records. I can prove I never received any money from Beatrice." Bank records can be manipulated, Ernest said coldly. You're an accountant. You know how to move money around. You could have transferred it to cash, Beatrice added. Or moved it through other accounts. You're smart enough to cover your tracks. I realized that anything I said would be twisted to fit their narrative. They'd already decided I was guilty, and now they were just looking for me to confess. I want to see all the evidence, I said firmly. I want copies of everything. If someone stole from you, Beatrice, I want to help you find out who really did it. We already know who did it, she replied. The question now is what we're going to do about it. Dad cleared his throat. We've talked about this as a family, and we've decided to give you a chance to make this right. If you pay back the money, we won't involve the police. Pay back money I didn't steal. $25,000, Mom said quietly. Within 48 hours. I looked around the room at these people I'd loved my entire life, people I'd trusted more than anyone in the world, and realized they'd already tried and convicted me in their minds. And if I don't pay, then we file charges, Ernest said. Identity theft, fraud theft from a family member. You could go to prison, Maggie. The ultimatum hung in the air like a dark cloud. I had 48 hours to either admit to a crime I didn't commit and pay $25,000 I didn't owe or face criminal charges that could destroy my career and my life. I need to go, I said, standing up. I need to think about this. There's nothing to think about, Beatrice said. Just do the right thing for once in your life. I walked toward the door, feeling like I was moving through underwater. At the threshold, I turned back to look at my family one more time. I love you all, I said. But I didn't do this, and I won't confess to something I didn't do. I drove home that night in a daze, my mind racing with disbelief and growing determination. They wanted a fight. They were going to get one. The next 48 hours were the longest of my life. I barely slept, couldn't eat, and called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My mind kept replaying the scene in my parents' living room, looking for clues I might have missed, trying to understand how this could be happening. I spent Tuesday morning researching lawyers who specialized in family disputes and criminal defense. The third attorney I called, Paula Davidson, agreed to see me that afternoon. Her office was in downtown Columbus in one of those old buildings with high ceilings and heavy wooden furniture that made you feel like serious business happened there. Paula was probably in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "This is an interesting case," she said when I finished. "The evidence seems damning on the surface, but there are several things that don't add up." "Like what?" "Well, first, if you were going to steal from your sister, would you really be stupid enough to do it from your own IP address? Any accountant smart enough to pull off this kind of theft would know how to cover their digital tracks." That was exactly what I'd been thinking. "So you believe me?" "I believe the evidence needs closer examination. I want to see everything they have, and I want to conduct our own investigation. Are you prepared for this to get expensive and ugly?" I thought about my savings account, my quiet life, my career that I'd worked so hard to build. I don't have a choice. If I don't fight this, my life is over anyway. Good. The first thing we need to do is hire a private investigator. I work with a guy named Dennis Walsh, who specializes in financial crimes. He's expensive, but he's very good at finding things people want to keep hidden. Paula arranged for Dennis to start immediately. While he began his investigation, she filed paperwork demanding all evidence from Beatrice's side and requesting a delay of any criminal charges pending review. Meanwhile, I started my own investigation. I printed out 3 years of bank statements, credit card records, and tax returns. I documented my whereabouts during every alleged theft, using work calendars, receipt timestamps, and even social media posts with location tags. I was building an alibi timeline that would prove my innocence, but the hardest part was the isolation. Word had somehow gotten out in Springfield about the accusations. My aunt called to tell me how disappointed she was. A cousin blocked me on Facebook. Even family friends started treating me differently. It felt like my entire support system had evaporated overnight. Work became my refuge, but even there, things were getting complicated. My boss, Janet, called me into her office on Thursday. "Maggie, I need to ask you something and I want you to be completely honest with me." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" "I got a call from someone claiming to be conducting a background check on you. They were asking about your access to client accounts and whether you'd ever shown signs of financial problems." "Who called?" "They wouldn't give me their name, but they mentioned something about a family legal matter." "Is there something I should know about?" I realized Ernest or Beatrice had taken their campaign against me beyond the family. They were trying to destroy my career, too. "I'm dealing with a false accusation from a family member," I said carefully. "I've hired an attorney and I expect to be completely cleared, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly." Janet studied my face for a long moment. "You've been one of our most reliable employees for 4 years. Unless there's evidence of wrongdoing, this office will support you. But Maggie, if this becomes a distraction that affects your work or our clients, we'll have to discuss your future here." I understood. My career was hanging by a thread, too. That evening, Dennis called with his first update. "I've been looking into Ernest's background, and there are some interesting things coming to light. Did you know he has a gambling problem?" "No. What kind of gambling?" "Casinos mostly. There's a riverboat casino about an hour from Springfield, and my sources tell me he's a regular. He's also been seen at the casino in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. That's a 4-hour drive, which suggests serious addiction." "How serious?" "Serious enough that he's borrowed money from some questionable people. I'm still tracking down the details, but it looks like he's in debt to some very unforgiving creditors." This was the first piece of information that made sense. If Ernest needed money desperately, he'd have motive to steal from Beatrice. But how could he make it look like I did it? "There's something else," Dennis continued. "I've been analyzing the timing of these alleged thefts from Beatrice's account. Several of them correspond exactly with major gambling losses Ernest suffered at the Lawrenceburg casino." "Can you prove that—" "I'm working on it. Casino security footage, credit card records, cell phone location data. It's going to take time, but I think we're onto something." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. Ernest had motive and opportunity. He lived in the same house as Beatrice, had access to her computer and personal information, and needed money desperately. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I still had to get through the next few days. Paula had managed to delay any criminal charges, but my family was expecting an answer to their ultimatum. Friday afternoon, Dad called. "Maggie, we need to know your decision." "My decision is that I'm going to prove my innocence. I've hired a lawyer and we're conducting our own investigation." "Honey, that's just going to make this harder on everyone. If you just admit what you did and pay the money back, we can keep this in the family." "I can't admit to something I didn't do, Dad, and I won't pay money I don't owe." "Then you're forcing us to file charges." "Then file them. But know this: when the truth comes out, and it will come out, you're going to have to live with the fact that you chose to believe lies over your own daughter." I hung up the phone and cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Not from fear, but from heartbreak. My family was about to try to send me to prison for something I didn't do. Monday morning, Paula called to tell me that criminal charges had been filed: identity theft, wire fraud, and theft from a family member. If convicted, I could face up to 10 years in prison. "Are you ready for this fight?" Paula asked. "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." 3 months later, I was sitting in the Hamilton County Courthouse, watching my family's lawyer, Frances Thompson, present their case against me. Judge Beverly Miller, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and no-nonsense demeanor, presided over what felt like the destruction of everything I'd ever known. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly gray. Local news cameras were stationed in the back, because apparently Sister Steals from Sister was the kind of story that sold newspapers in small-town Ohio. Beatrice sat at the plaintiff's table with Thompson while my parents sat in the first row behind her. They hadn't looked at me once since entering the courthouse. Ernest sat beside my father, occasionally whispering to him and pointing at various documents. On my side of the courtroom, I sat with Paula. Behind us were a few friends from work, and my cousin Rachel, who was the only family member who believed my side of the story. Thompson's opening statement was devastating. He painted me as a jealous, financially struggling sister who had betrayed family trust for money. He held up bank statements and computer logs like they were smoking guns. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, "this is a simple case of family betrayal. The defendant, Margaret Collins, systematically stole $25,000 from her sister's savings account over 8 months. She used her knowledge of computers and banking gained through her profession as an accountant to cover her tracks. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable." He walked through each theft methodically. March 3rd, $800. March 15th, $2,000. April 2nd, $1,200. Each transaction was documented with computer logs showing access from Columbus during times when I allegedly would have been home from work. "The defendant will claim innocence," Thompson continued. "She will try to create doubt where none exists. But computers don't lie. Bank records don't lie. The evidence speaks for itself." Paula's opening was more subdued but confident. "Members of the jury, my client, Margaret Collins, is innocent of these charges. The evidence you're going to see may appear convincing on the surface, but when examined closely, it tells a very different story. Someone did steal from Beatrice Collins, but it wasn't Margaret. It was someone much closer to home, someone with greater access and greater motive." The first witness was Beatrice herself. She took the stand wearing a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back looking like the picture of a wronged sister. Thompson led her through her discovery of the thefts, her shock and devastation, and the impact on her family. "When did you first realize money was missing from your account?" Thompson asked. "It was in November," Beatrice said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was trying to make a house payment, and there wasn't enough money in the account. I thought it was a bank error at first." "What did you do then?" "I called the bank and asked them to research it. That's when they gave me the transaction history and showed me all the unauthorized withdrawals." "How did you feel when you saw that evidence?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Devastated. That money was supposed to be for my children's college education. It represented years of saving, sacrificing, putting aside every dollar we could spare." "Did you have any idea who might have taken it?" "At first, no. But when the bank showed me the computer access logs, and I saw they were coming from Columbus, I knew it had to be Maggie. She was the only family member who lived there." Thompson then led her through a detailed account of how I allegedly could have gained access to her banking information. According to Beatrice, I had asked her about her financial setup during Christmas dinner the previous year, showing interest in how she managed her accounts online. "She said she wanted to help me get better organized," Beatrice testified. "She asked about what bank I used, whether I did online banking, things like that. I trusted her completely, so I answered all her questions." On cross-examination, Paula was gentle but persistent. "Mrs. Collins, you said Margaret asked about your banking setup at Christmas. Were other family members present during this conversation?" "Yes, I think so." "Including your husband, Ernest?" "Yes." "Did Margaret ever ask for your specific account numbers or passwords?" "Not directly, but I'm asking for a yes or no answer. Did she ever ask for your account numbers or passwords?" "No." "Did she ever ask you to write down any banking information?" "No." "During this conversation about financial organization, did she suggest any specific banks or services?" "She mentioned some budgeting apps and said online banking was convenient." "But she never asked to see your actual accounts or access your computer?" "No, but she didn't need to. She could have figured it out." Paula moved on to Beatrice's financial situation and her husband's employment history. This is where things got interesting. Mrs. Collins, what is your husband's current employment status? He's between jobs right now. How long has he been between jobs? About 6 months. What about before that? How steady has his employment been over the past 2 years? Beatrice shifted uncomfortably. He's had some challenges finding the right fit. Is it fair to say he's been unemployed more often than employed during that period? He's been looking for work. Mrs. Collins, are you aware of your husband's gambling activities? Thompson objected, but Judge Miller allowed the question. I don't know what you mean, Beatrice said. Are you aware that your husband frequently visits casinos? He might go occasionally with friends. Are you aware that he's visited the Lawrenceburg Casino in Indiana more than 30 times in the past year? Beatrice looked shocked. I don't know anything about that. This was the first crack in their story, and I could see it register with some jury members. If Beatrice didn't know about Ernest's gambling, what else didn't she know Ernest's testimony was next, and he was clearly nervous. He fidgeted with his tie and avoided eye contact with the jury. Thompson led him through his account of witnessing me ask Beatrice about her banking information. I heard Margaret asking detailed questions about Beatrice's financial setup, he said. She seemed really interested in how Beatrice accessed her accounts online. What was your impression of this conversation? At the time, I thought she was just trying to help. But now looking back, it seems like she was gathering information. Did you ever observe Margaret using computers in your home? Yes, she would sometimes use our laptop when she visited. She said she needed to check work email or something. This was news to me. I rarely use their computer, and certainly never for banking purposes. On cross-examination, Paula zeroed in on Ernest's gambling and his access to Beatrice's information. Mr. Collins, how often do you visit casinos? I don't really gamble. Sir, I have records showing you visited casinos more than 50 times in the past 18 months. Are you saying those records are wrong? Ernest's face flushed red. Maybe I go more than I thought. How much money have you lost gambling in the past year? I object, Thompson said. Relevance. Your Honor, this goes to motive and opportunity, Paula replied. I'll allow it. I don't keep track, Ernest said. Would it surprise you to learn that casino records show losses exceeding $30,000? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Beatrice looked stunned. That's impossible, Ernest said. Sir, do you have access to your wife's computer? We share a computer. Do you know her banking passwords? We share financial responsibilities. Is that a yes? Yes, I know her passwords. Have you ever accessed her banking accounts? Only to help her pay bills. Sir, isn't it true that you've been accessing your wife's savings account to fund your gambling addiction? No, that's completely false. But the damage was done. The jury had heard that Ernest had massive gambling debts, complete access to Beatrice's accounts, and a motive to steal. More importantly, Beatrice herself seemed to be learning about her husband's gambling problem for the first time. My parents' testimony was heartbreaking to watch. They both clearly wished they weren't there, but they felt obligated to support Beatrice. Dad talked about how responsible and trustworthy I'd always been, which actually helped my case more than hurt it. Mom cried through most of her testimony, saying she couldn't believe any of this was happening. The technical evidence was where Thompson thought he had his strongest case. A digital forensics expert testified about the IP address logs and access patterns that seemed to point to Columbus. The evidence clearly shows that these accounts were accessed from an IP address registered to a Columbus Internet Service provider, the expert said. The timing of these accesses corresponds with evening hours when someone would typically be at home. But Paula had her own expert ready. Dr. Raymond Clark, a cybersecurity specialist from Ohio State University, explained how easy it would be to make computer access appear to come from a different location. Using readily available software, someone could make their internet activity appear to originate from anywhere in the world, Dr. Clark testified. IP spoofing is a common technique that requires no special technical knowledge. Could someone in Springfield make their computer activity appear to come from Columbus? Absolutely. There are dozens of apps and services that would allow that. Would this technique leave any traces? If you knew what to look for, yes. But most people wouldn't know to look for those traces. The prosecution's case had taken 2 days to present, and I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. But I could see that Paula had created some doubt, especially about Ernest's role in all of this. On day 3, it was our turn to present evidence, and Paula had saved the best for last. Paula stood up for our opening presentation with a confidence that made me sit up straighter. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce evidence that was recently discovered through our independent investigation. She walked to our table and picked up a manila folder that I'd never seen before. Dennis had been working around the clock for weeks, and apparently he'd found something big. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Paula said, you're about to see evidence that will completely change your understanding of this case. Thompson immediately objected. Your Honor, we haven't seen this evidence in discovery. Your Honor, this evidence was only discovered yesterday through subpoenas that were processed over the weekend. We provided copies to opposing counsel this morning as required by law. Judge Miller examined the papers Paula handed her. I'll allow it, but you'll need to establish proper foundation. Paula called Dennis Walsh to the stand first. He explained his background as a private investigator specializing in financial crimes and detailed the investigation he'd conducted on my behalf. Mr. Walsh, what did your investigation reveal about Ernest Collins' financial activities? We discovered that Mr. Collins has been gambling extensively at multiple casinos over the past 2 years. Our analysis shows losses exceeding $47,000 during that period. How did you determine this? Through casino records, credit card statements, and cell phone location data. We were able to track his movements and correlate them with gambling activity. Did you discover anything else significant? Yes. We found that Mr. Collins had opened a previously undisclosed bank account at First National Bank of Springfield in January of this year. Paula handed Dennis a document. Can you identify this exhibit? This is a bank statement for Ernest Collins' account at First National Bank, covering the period from January through October of this year. What does this statement show? Dennis looked directly at the jury. It shows a series of deposits that correspond exactly with the dates and amounts of money that was allegedly stolen from Beatrice Collins's savings account. The courtroom erupted. Judge Miller had to bang her gavel several times to restore order. I watched Ernest's face turn white as a sheet. Beatrice looked confused and horrified. Can you be more specific about these deposits? Paula asked. Certainly. On March 3rd, $800 was withdrawn from Beatrice Collins' savings account. On the same day, $800 was deposited into Ernest Collins' checking account. On March 15th, $2,000 was withdrawn from the savings account and $2,000 was deposited into Ernest's account. This pattern continues for every single alleged theft. Paula introduced the bank statement as evidence and had Dennis walk through each matching transaction. The timing was perfect sometimes, within hours of each other. There was no way this could be a coincidence. Mr. Walsh, based on your investigation, do you have an opinion about who stole money from Beatrice Collins' savings account? Based on the evidence, it's clear that Ernest Collins systematically transferred money from his wife's savings account to his own checking account, then used that money to fund his gambling activities. Thompson's cross-examination was desperate and ineffective. He tried to suggest that I could have somehow arranged for Ernest's account to receive the money, but it made no logical sense. Isn't it possible that Margaret Collins transferred money to Ernest Collins's account to make him look guilty? That would require Margaret to have access to Ernest's banking information and the ability to deposit money into his account without his knowledge. Given that these deposits were made in person at bank branches in Springfield, and Margaret lives in Columbus, that scenario is extremely unlikely. Paula then called her computer expert, Dr. Clark, back to the stand. Dr. Clark, you've now had a chance to examine Ernest Collins' computer. What did you find? I found clear evidence that someone had used that computer to access Beatrice Collins' bank account multiple times over the past 8 months. I also found software designed to mask the computer's location and make it appear that internet activity was originating from Columbus rather than Springfield. Can you explain how this software works? Essentially, it's a proxy service that routes internet traffic through servers in different cities. Someone in Springfield could use this software to make their online activity appear to come from Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, or anywhere else they chose. Did you find evidence that this software was actively used during the times when Beatrice Collins' account was accessed? Yes. The log files show that the location masking software was running during every single instance when the bank account was accessed. This was the smoking gun we needed. Not only had Ernest stolen the money, but he deliberately tried to frame me by making the computer access appear to come from my city. Thompson tried to object to this testimony, arguing that the computer evidence could have been planted, but Judge Miller allowed it. For my own testimony, Paula kept it simple and direct. I explained my relationship with my family, my financial situation, and my complete lack of access to Beatrice's banking information. I denied every accusation and explained that I'd never had any financial problems that would motivate me to steal from anyone, especially my own family. Margaret, did you ever access your sister's bank account? No, never. Did you ever ask her for her account numbers or passwords? No. Did you ever transfer money from her account to your own? Absolutely not. Do you have any idea how money from her account ended up in Ernest's account? Based on the evidence we've seen, it appears that Ernest stole it and tried to frame me. Thompson's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to make me look calculating and cold, suggesting that I'd manipulated Ernest into stealing the money so I could escape blame. But the evidence didn't support that theory, and I think the jury could see through his desperation. The final piece of evidence Paula presented was my own financial records. She showed that I'd never received any unexplained deposits, never made any unusual purchases, and had actually been steadily saving money throughout the period when the thefts occurred. If Margaret had stolen $25,000, Paula asked the jury in her closing argument, where is that money? It's not in her accounts. She didn't buy anything expensive. She didn't pay off any debts. The money simply isn't there. But we know exactly where that money went, she continued, holding up Ernest's bank statements. It went directly into Ernest Collins' account, and from there to casinos where he gambled it away. Thompson's closing argument focused on the original computer evidence and tried to argue that Ernest's bank account was somehow irrelevant. But his heart wasn't in it. The evidence was too overwhelming. Judge Miller instructed the jury and sent them out to deliberate. They were back in less than 2 hours. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood up. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of identity theft, how do you find not guilty? On the charge of wire fraud, how do you find not guilty? On the charge of theft from a family member, how do you find not guilty? I collapsed into Paula's arms, crying with relief. Behind me, I could hear Beatrice sobbing, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage and betrayal as she realized what her husband had done to her and to me. As the courtroom cleared, I watched Ernest being led away in handcuffs. New charges were being filed against him based on the evidence we'd presented. Identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, and perjury would likely send him to prison for several years. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Miller addressed the courtroom before dismissing everyone. I want to state for the record that this court finds the charges against Margaret Collins to have been completely without merit. The evidence clearly shows that she was the victim of a deliberate frame-up by Ernest Collins. I hope this serves as a reminder that accusations should be based on thorough investigation, not assumptions. Walking out of that courthouse felt like being reborn. Paula hugged me on the steps, while reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. The story that had started as sister accused of theft was now innocent woman framed by brother-in-law. But the legal victory was only the beginning of a much longer journey toward healing. My parents approached me hesitantly as the crowd began to disperse. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few months, and Mom's eyes were red from crying. Maggie, Dad said quietly, we owe you an apology that we can never fully make. We're so sorry, sweetheart, Mom added. We should have believed you. We should have known you'd never do something like that. Their apologies felt hollow after months of being treated like a criminal by my own family. The hurt ran too deep for a simple, I'm sorry, to fix. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But this isn't something we can just get past with an apology. You chose to believe that I was capable of stealing from my own sister. You were willing to send me to prison rather than consider that maybe you didn't have the whole story. We were just trying to protect Beatrice and the children, Dad said. And what about protecting me? I'm your daughter too. Mom reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. We want to make this right, Maggie. Tell us how. I need time, I said. A lot of time. And I need you to understand that trust once broken doesn't just magically repair itself. Beatrice was standing about 20 feet away holding Alice and Tommy's hands. She looked devastated, and I felt sorry for her despite everything. She'd been Ernest's victim too in a different way. Maggie, she called out, walking toward me. I don't know what to say. You could start with an apology. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I believed him when he convinced me you'd taken the money. I should have known better. Yes, you should have. He manipulated all of us, she continued. He made me think you were jealous of my family, that you resented helping us financially. He played on insecurities I didn't even know I had. I looked at my niece and nephew, who seemed confused by all the adult drama around them. They were the innocent victims in all of this. What are you going to do now? I asked Beatrice. I'm filing for divorce. I can't stay married to someone who would steal from our children and try to destroy my relationship with my sister. The kids and I are going to stay with Mom and Dad while I figure out our next steps. Over the following weeks, the truth about Ernest's deception became even clearer. The private investigator's report revealed that Ernest had been planning this scheme for months. He'd researched IP spoofing techniques, opened the secret bank account, and systematically gathered information about my life and schedule to make me look guilty. His gambling debts were even worse than we'd initially discovered. He owed money to loan sharks who were threatening violence if he didn't pay up. Stealing from Beatrice's savings account had been his desperate attempt to buy time, and framing me had been his way of avoiding consequences. Ernest pleaded guilty to multiple charges and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The judge ordered him to pay restitution to Beatrice for the stolen money, though given his financial situation, she'd probably never see most of it. The case received significant media attention, partly because of the family drama angle, and partly because it highlighted how easy it was for someone to manipulate digital evidence to frame an innocent person. I was asked to speak at several conferences about financial fraud and family abuse. My employer, Janet, was incredibly supportive throughout the entire process. Not only did she give me time off for the trial, but she also offered me a promotion afterward. What you went through would have broken a lot of people, she told me. The fact that you handled it with such grace and determination tells me everything I need to know about your character. But the hardest part was rebuilding relationships with my family. The legal victory had cleared my name, but it hadn't erased the months of being treated like a criminal by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in my new office looking at a framed copy of that bank statement that had changed everything. Not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because it reminded me that truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. My relationship with my parents had slowly begun to heal, though it would never be the same. We started with awkward phone calls, then careful visits, gradually rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. They'd enrolled in family counseling to understand how they'd been manipulated and to learn better communication skills. Dad admitted that he'd always felt guilty about not being able to provide more financial support for Beatrice's family, which made him more likely to believe she was a victim. Mom confessed that she'd been so focused on protecting her grandchildren that she'd lost sight of protecting all her children equally. Beatrice and I had developed an unlikely friendship through our shared experience of being betrayed by Ernest. She was working as a receptionist at a medical office while going to school part-time to become a medical assistant. The kids were adjusting well to their new life, and Alice had even started asking when Aunt Maggie was coming to visit again. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," Beatrice told me during one of our coffee meetings. Ernest's mood swings his secretiveness about money the way he was always eager to deflect attention onto other people when financial problems came up. "He was very good at manipulation," I said. "Don't blame yourself for not seeing through it." "But I should have trusted you. We grew up together. I know who you are, and you're not someone who would steal from family. The important thing is that we know the truth now." My work had become more meaningful since the trial. I'd started specializing in helping clients who'd been victims of financial fraud, particularly cases involving family members. There was a surprising amount of demand for this service, and I found it rewarding to help people navigate both the legal and emotional aspects of financial betrayal. I'd also started dating again. During the worst months of the legal battle, I'd isolated myself from everyone except my lawyer and investigator. But as my life stabilized, I realized I was ready to trust people again. The man I was seeing, Thomas, was a high school history teacher who'd heard about my case through mutual friends. What I appreciated most about him was that he never treated me like I was damaged or fragile because of what I'd been through. "You stood up for yourself when everyone else gave up on you," he told me. "That's not trauma, that's strength." Professional opportunities had opened up in unexpected ways. A publisher approached me about writing a book about my experience focusing on how to protect yourself from financial fraud and family manipulation. Several law firms had asked me to consult on similar cases, helping them understand the accounting aspects of financial crimes. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own instincts again. During those dark months when everyone I loved was telling me I was guilty, I'd started to doubt my own memory and perception. The trial had proven that my instincts were right, and that confidence had carried over into every aspect of my life. I'd also learned the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I could forgive my family for doubting me without pretending that their actions hadn't caused lasting damage. Forgiveness was about freeing myself from anger and resentment. Reconciliation was about rebuilding relationships, and that had to be earned. Some relationships couldn't be repaired. Several extended family members who'd turned their backs on me during the accusations never apologized after the truth came out. I'd learned that some people prefer to disappear rather than admit they were wrong, and that was their choice to make. The most unexpected outcome was how the experience had changed my perspective on success and happiness. Before the accusations, I'd defined myself largely through my career achievements and financial stability. The trial had forced me to dig deeper and discover what really mattered to me. I cared less about impressing other people, and more about surrounding myself with people who truly knew and supported me. I cared less about accumulating money and more about using my skills to help others. I cared less about maintaining perfect family relationships and more about maintaining honest ones. Ernest was scheduled to be released from prison in 2 more years. Beatrice had made it clear that she would never allow him contact with the children, and she'd moved to a different town to make sure their paths wouldn't cross. She'd also changed her name back to her maiden name and was slowly building a new life. As for that bank statement that started this whole story, I kept it as a reminder that sometimes the evidence you need to prove your innocence is hidden in the most unexpected places. It took months of investigation and thousands of dollars in legal fees to uncover it, but it was there all along. The truth had been sitting in Ernest's account statements the entire time, waiting for someone to look in the right place and ask the right questions. It made me think about how many other innocent people might be sitting in prison cells because no one bothered to dig deep enough to find the real evidence. I still lived in Columbus, still worked as an accountant, still drove my reliable Honda Civic. But everything else about my life had changed. I was stronger, more confident, and more selective about who I trusted with my heart. The little girl who used to do anything to keep peace in the family had grown into a woman who would fight for the truth even when it cost her everything. And sometimes fighting for the truth is the only way to discover who you really are. That bank statement taught me that justice isn't always swift, but it's worth waiting for. Truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it, and sometimes the very thing meant to destroy you becomes the key to your freedom. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone else doubted you? Have you experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more true stories about overcoming family drama and finding justice. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that truth really does have a way of winning in the end. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that no matter how dark things might seem, there's always hope for justice and healing. Stay strong and never stop fighting for the truth.